The Five Nights at Freddy's movie released last month, and that is a sentence that I just said. It's interesting to live in a world where probably the most infamous development hell video game movie story ever is just out now. But hey, the movie made almost $300 million, time to talk about a sequel. Hey, the actors and directors are already talking about it, why can't I? Just want to give a little warning before this video starts that my Plushy campaign will be ending as soon as it hits 200 sales, and we're currently at 177 at the time of recording this, and it's about 23 left, so if you want to get one, not a lot of time left. Alright, back to the video. So I'm going to be splitting this video into 3 sections. The first section is going to be going over what the sequel is even going to be about, what is it going to be based on, how are they going to take the plot, and then I'm going to go over comments that you guys have left, and then I'm going to do a little conclusion section. So without any further ado, let's get into the FNAF movie. 2. So I think one of the most important things to think of when it comes to Five Nights at Freddy's 2 is that, what will it be based off of? Now I know that sounds stupid, oh obviously it's going to be based off of Five Nights at Freddy's 2, but that could have also been assumed about the second novel, but the second novel ended up being this. And with how much influence the movie takes from the first novel, it generally does make me wonder, will this movie be taking any influence from the Twisted Ones? Or at least the concept of nightmare animatronics? Or is it going to stick purely to Five Nights at Freddy's 2? Well, it's pretty clear based on the end credits thing with the Puppets music box that the movie is going to be taking heavy influence from FNAF 2. So we can at the very least expect elements like the puppet, balloon boy, and the toy animatronics, as those are all definitely essentials in adapting this game. And I think since it's been pretty well established that the movie series isn't afraid at all to shy away from the game timeline, I think FNAF 2 will definitely end up being a sequel rather than a prequel like it is in the games. And I also think that the movie will take influence from the Twisted Ones, but not necessarily the Twisted animatronics, but more so Springtrap in that book. In the Twisted Ones, we see a version of Springtrap who has been rotting in the pizzeria for a couple years rather than 30. In this book, Springtrap is a lot more energetic, I guess. He's talking a lot, his ego is through the roof because he survived. In the game universe, it's pretty obvious that the 30-year nap definitely bummed the guy out a bit. But in the Twisted Ones, after the 3-year gap, he is thrilled. And I think we're definitely going to see more of that psychotic side of William in the sequel. The part of him that just thinks he's immortal. Considering there's a 3-movie deal, I think it's pretty certain that Matthew Lillard will be returning in the sequel, and I'd assume he would be Springtrap, because I feel like mixing FNAF 2 and FNAF 3 together would go really well for the movie. Now, if they introduce Springtrap in the second movie, what's the third movie going to be like? I don't know, there's a lot that they could do with the other 3 games in the timeline at this point. I have no doubt that combining FNAF 2 and FNAF 3 together into one movie would go over pretty well. It would still leave more than enough to do for the third movie. Cause let's be real, I don't really think FNAF 3 would work that well as a movie, cause it'd be kind of the most boring game in the series to make a movie out of. I also think combining FNAF 2 and 3 for the second movie would also address a lot of the criticism that the first movie received. That being that there wasn't enough evil animatronics, they weren't aggressive enough. A lot of people came out of the movie disappointed that there weren't more kills. And I think a perfect way to address that would be having the main killer at the forefront throughout the whole runtime, along with a brand new cast of killer animatronics right there. There's tons of creative things they could do with Mangle and the toy animatronics. The puppet could be a really cool plot element, which I think will be very important in the sequel. And we'll get back to the puppet later, but for now I want to talk about another aspect. The withered animatronics. How will they be incorporated? The end of the first movie almost definitely sets up the fact that the original animatronics are probably friendly now. They wouldn't really have a reason to be angry at Abby or Mike again. So it makes me think that they're going to be semi-protagonists in this next movie. Not to the degree of the humans, but I don't think they'll be evil. Especially because this movie will have no shortage of bad guys without them. And I do have a pretty cool plot idea that kind of builds off of stuff that happened in the first movie. And I don't know if anybody's mentioned this yet, but I think it would be a pretty cool idea, so hear me out here. So when William killed the kids and put them in the suits, they didn't retain their memories once they began possessing them. Well, we know that the same thing happened to Hank and Max, who were stuffed into Sparky the dog and Shadow Freddy. What if they began possessing the suits that they were stuffed into, and William Afton tricked them into thinking that they were in the same position he was, which convinces them to work with him? And the main reason I say this is because the FNAF 3 minigames show a Shadow Freddy animatronic luring all the animatronics to the back room where William Afton will tear them apart. I think that since Max was a character who in the earlier versions of the script was clearly meant to be a lot more important, I think she's going to return in the second movie as Shadow Freddy and is going to help out William to destroy the animatronics, which would lead to the creation of the withered animatronics. It would be sort of a reverse of what happened in the FNAF 3 minigames, where instead of William getting spring-locked at the end, he gets spring-locked at the beginning, and then they get lured back. I think this would be a really good way to show off just how scary Springtrap is, and the fact that him being dead doesn't really impact his ability to influence the souls of his victims. Now, I think another pretty obvious plot question to point out would be, how would the puppet and the toy animatronics be introduced? Well, I think the easiest way to go about this would be introducing Henry into the picture, along with the idea of the overall Fazbear Entertainment Company. Because the wider Fazbear Entertainment Corporation has to exist in this universe at least to some degree, because we see a ton of mass-produced products at the prize counter in the movie. And going off of the game and book universes, Fazbear Entertainment is quite a large company that makes a variety of different things like toys and cartoons and restaurants. Another bit of evidence that Fazbear Entertainment can still be around is that we see a restaurant called Sparky's Diner in the movie, and we could assume that Sparky the dog was their mascot, and that diner is still very much open, which would mean that Fazbear Entertainment likely owned them, similar to how they also own L Chips in the game universe. So it's like entirely possible. So what I think is going to happen is Henry is going to come back to the town that he originally founded Freddy's in with William, and he's going to open up a new Freddy Fazbear's Pizza with the goal of making it as safe as possible. I think it's likely that in this universe, Henry probably left the company for a while after William Afton had left Fredbear's to make Freddy Fazbear's. Because I think it's very obvious in the movie universe that William Afton is the only guy who opened Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. He is the owner. Which means that Henry couldn't have been involved then, but that doesn't rule out that he could have been involved back when Fredbear's Family Diner was open, which we know it has to have existed because, Golden Freddy and Spring Bonnie are here. So that explains the toy animatronics, but how would the puppet come into the picture? There's a few different options to how they could handle the puppet. She could either be possessed by Garrett or the Charlotte. And while we haven't had anything about Charlotte in the movie universe so far, we do know that there is something that could imply her existence, and that's Ella. In the novel trilogy universe, Ella is an animatronic that was made specifically for Charlie. And considering she's a Springlock suit, which was back at Fredbear's, which is when Henry would have likely actually been at the company, there are some implications relating to Charlie's existence in this universe that come from this animatronic existing. So I'm honestly not really sure what direction they're going to end up going in, because Charlie is a very important character in most FNAF timelines. She's the main protagonist of the book series, and she's very significant in the game timeline, so I feel like having her completely absent from the movie timeline would be kind of a strange decision. But I also think thematically Garrett possessing the puppet would be a bit better. But then we also wouldn't really have a reason for Henry to come into the picture. You see the problem here? Although I don't think that Garrett's spirit is still around, because we don't really see anything related to his spirit in the movie. I mean, the only time he talks is clearly just a reflection of him made by the other spirits. And I have a suspicion that Garrett might actually just be gone. I think a good reason why Henry would want to split apart from William would be the fact that maybe his daughter went missing and he couldn't handle that, so he left the company. I don't know, there's still a lot of iffy stuff going on here. I do think they're going to introduce Charlie in some form, and I also don't really think Garrett is possessing any of the animatronics. Although, I guess it is possible, it's just really confusing at the moment. The movie universe is still very new, so we're basically back at the FNAF 1 stage of lore and for this new universe. So there's obviously not a whole lot we can go off of without straying towards the actual game timeline, which is clearly not taking place in. But yeah, those are just a bunch of ideas I'm spitballing for what they could do for the sequel. I think there's a lot of really cool ideas and directions that they could go in, and I'm really excited to see what they end up doing and see if I was right on anything. But I think it's time we read some comments. So I wanted to do a fun little thing for this video where I go over some of you guys' predictions from one of my posts, and I'm gonna go over them and kind of give my thoughts on them. Andrew's Chaos Son says, if we follow game's logic, it'll actually be a prequel, and maybe William will be the protagonist. I'm not really sure about this one, because I don't really think William Afton would make a good protagonist in any context, because he's not a good person. Nor does he have any sympathetic elements to his character. It'd be kind of hard to root for a protagonist who's actively abusing his daughter. I don't personally think the movie could be a prequel, but I also wouldn't rule it out completely, because I could see it happening. I just think they're going to take a more straightforward approach for the general audiences. But in terms of William being the protagonist, I really don't think that's possible. I think he'd only be a villain. Zamith says, they may reveal who did the bite of 87 by mentioning it or a flashback. That reveal may also be canon to the game's lore if Scott says it's canon to the game's lore too. Well, I feel like Scott giving us a straight-up correct answer on the game's timeline would be kind of interesting, but I don't think he would do it. If the answer lined up pretty well with the game's timeline, then I feel like it could have impact on that. I think a statement from Scott is really unlikely, but I think getting to know who did the bite of 87 would be a kind of likely thing for the sequel. Although, if it wasn't a prequel, I'm not really sure how they would handle that, because it would have had to have been one of the FNAF 1 animatronics, because that's when the FNAF 1 location was open in this universe, not the FNAF 2 location. So I don't know, the timeline's kind of messed up in the movie universe. It's definitely not one-to-one. Like, if any animatronic did the bite of 87, it would have had to be an animatronic from the FNAF 1 location, but we would have found that out in the first movie if that was the case, when it clearly is not. So, you know what? Changing my mind to that one, we're not gonna see who did the bite of 87 in FNAF 2. Unless it's a... Actually, no, I genuinely just can't see a way where they could work it in. Unless there were two locations open simultaneously, which I guess I could see. Maybe the FNAF 2 location was open alongside the FNAF 1 location? I don't know. Gregory is there. Hear me out, no. Crazy JP says, a lot more flashback scenes. I believe we will get an introduction to Henry, who may be operating another location, or it's maybe just another abandoned location, though I think we're 100% meeting Henry. Henry finding out what happened to Garrett and see a lot more from both locations back when they were operating, considering that Lillard was the standout performance and they find a way to squeeze him into the sequel. Sorry for being terrible at reading, but yeah, I definitely agree with this one a lot, because one of the biggest complaints for the first movie was that there was a lack of flashback scenes and they were all cut from the movie. There was going to be a news report on the missing children incident. There was going to be a flashback scene with... There might have not been a flashback scene with young Vanessa, that's not really confirmed, but there was going to be a flashback scene of like a performance at the animatronics when they were brand new, but that was all cut, which is kind of disappointing. So I could very much see them wanting to kind of fix this issue in the sequel by adding all the flashback scenes into it. Like, please Scott, please Blumhouse, please Universal, do not trim down the movie. Just like let it be the length it needs to be, because there was a lot of stuff cut from the first movie, and I really don't want to see that happen again. The Meme Man Dan says, I want to know, if possible, if there was an abandoned Fredbear's area. Would be sick to explore. I definitely agree that seeing Fredbear's would be awesome, and I think having it be abandoned would be super creepy for the movie, but I also don't really think it's likely since the animatronics wouldn't be there, and, I mean, what's the point at that point? Unless they wanted to be that being where the puppet came from in this universe, which I think would be pretty cool. But I don't know, I think seeing Fredbear's in a flashback is honestly way more likely. Bupboy6412 says, they'll probably have their own unique versions of the withered animatronics, ones that look more like the FNAF 1 animatronics. As much as this pains me to say, yeah, probably, I really love the withered designs, and I'm gonna hate if they don't put them in the movie, but at the same time, it wouldn't really make a lot of sense if the FNAF 1 animatronics got destroyed and then they just magically had different suits on. Cause in the game timeline, the withered animatronics existed before the FNAF 1 animatronics, and then they got repaired into the FNAF 1 animatronics, so it makes sense that the suits are different. But if it was in the movie, that wouldn't really work, so they'd probably have to redesign the withered animatronics to work with the FNAF 1 suits. which, knowing Jim Henson's Creature Shop, I think they could definitely pull off, but it would be kind of weird and take a while to get used to. But yeah, I think that's enough questions for today. Glad I could look through some comments. Congratulations to everybody who ended up getting featured. So, in conclusion, there's a lot of things that could happen in FNAF 2, and I'm honestly both scared and excited to see what they end up going with. Let's just hope they don't go with the Twisted Ones plot.